This is a disturbing memory from my young childhood. I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mom would usually take my brother and me trick-or-treating, but this particular year, after school, she dropped me off at my friend Sean's house, where Sean, our friend Johnny, and I would go together. Johnny and Sean were a year older than me. We met while I was playing with my brother on the block. Johnny and Sean lived around the block from me. Sean had a weird upbringing that I never really understood. His sister was like 20 years old. There was a big gap between them, and she was always his caretaker. It seemed whenever I was at his house, it always smelled like cats, and his sister always had a different guy over. It seemed like his sister was always cold to me in the sense that she'd never acknowledge me or say hi or anything. Sean's dad was never in the picture, and his mom, I believe, was always working out of town. I guess I only met Sean's mom a few times. We never really stayed in touch long enough for me to figure all this out. Anyway, my mom dropped me off at Sean's expecting that Sean's mom would be trick-or-treating with us. After saying goodbye, I went into his house. Johnny was already there. We all had big pillow sacks to fill with candy. This was around the time that I learned that neither Sean's mom nor sister were coming with us to supervise. I was young, so I sort of felt slightly uncomfortable knowing that Johnny and Sean would be leading the way. But at the same time, I felt a sense of excitement that we'd have more freedom. I knew for a fact my mom would not have approved of us going unsupervised, though. So eventually, we were off into the neighborhood, walking around doing our rounds door to door. Quite a few people asked if we were alone or where our parents were, and Johnny would always be the one to use the same lie that his mom was up ahead with his sister. It worked every time. This was on a Friday, so we didn't get to start trick-or-treating until around 5 o'clock. But we didn't have school the next day, so we intended on going until our pillow sacks were completely full. We took a break after a couple of hours and went to Sean's, where he heated up a bunch of frozen pizzas. At the time, I was so jealous of the apparent freedom he had in his house, not having parents who cared about what he did. But looking back now, I count myself super blessed to have grown up in a household with 2 strict parents. After we hung out at his house for an hour and watched Halloween specials on Nickelodeon while eating pizza and candies, Johnny eventually was picked up by his mom. But Sean and I wanted to keep going, so we eventually headed back out for round 2. It was dark out now, and it had to be past 8 p.m. There were a lot fewer trick-or-treaters now. We tried to go to certain blocks we hadn't gone down yet, which meant straying further away from Sean's house. We found a block we hadn't touched yet and continued knocking on doors. Some houses didn't answer at this hour, and mostly everyone else had a comment about us being alone or how it was getting late. We noticed a man pushing a stroller a couple of houses down behind us. He was walking very slowly in our direction, probably a dad trick-or-treating for his young child. As we continued going door to door, the man with the stroller got closer. Eventually, we heard him go, "SH," and singing softly. Eventually, he caught up to us and he said, "How's the trick-or-treating going, boys?" And we replied, "Good," at the same time. Then he said, "It's pretty late. I'm on my way back to my house. I can give you guys the rest of my candy." Sean and I looked at each other with telling faces, as if we just hit the jackpot. Sean asked what kind of candies, and he said a bunch of bags of different things. He said he didn't get to give much away because he wanted to take his daughter out for a trick-or-treat stroll. He did have a bag dangling on one of the handles of the stroller, which was filled with some candies. The stroller was fully covered by a folding piece on the top, so we couldn't see his daughter. He said she's asleep and he didn't want to wake her up, but he pointed ahead and said his house is just up this way. So we followed behind him as he pushed the stroller. He was walking a little faster now. As we walked, I realized there was next to no one else out at this point, even though it was a Friday night. It seemed like a quieter side of the neighborhood. On Halloween night in 2016, I had taken on a simple yet enjoyable task, distributing candy to the kids who knocked on our door. My mother had bought an enormous amount of candy, enough to feed an entire neighborhood for weeks after the celebration. I always told her she went overboard with the sweets, especially since I was trying to lose weight. But she didn't seem to listen much. She wanted to make Halloween night fun for everyone. Our house was located in a cul-de-sac, a place that rarely saw kids. We always had a loyal group of kids who knew how generous our candy supply was, so they came back every year. But this year, Halloween fell on a Monday, a day that typically didn't attract many visitors. I was in college and had taken advantage of my days off on Mondays and Wednesdays, so I spent most of the day at the gym, then settled down to work on my assignments. As the evening approached, the sounds of children began to fill the air outside. The clock was nearing 4:30 when the doorbell rang for the first time. When I opened the door, I found a group of little kids dressed in various costumes, their faces lighting up with joy and anticipation. The number of kids was small, maybe 10 or 15. With each ring of the doorbell, our dog, Vito, barked like crazy, adding to the lively atmosphere. As time passed, the commotion began to die down. By 8 o'clock, things had quieted down significantly. I felt I had accomplished enough with my homework, so I enjoyed a bowl of my mom's leftover stew, then headed to my room to watch Game of Thrones. I was just getting into the second episode when I heard the doorbell ring again. I glanced at the clock. It was 9:30, far too late for trick-or-treaters to be out. When I went downstairs to answer the door, I was startled to see a tall man dressed in a clown costume with a frightening mask. He was alone, and there was nothing about him that suggested he was a child. His massive frame made me feel uneasy. I didn't open the door completely. I merely said, "Sorry, we don't have any more candy," then quickly shut it and locked it tight. I immediately regretted opening the door, realizing how wrong I had been. Moments later, I heard the doorbell ring again, and this time I didn't hear any footsteps walking away. My anxiety grew as I tried to resume my show, attempting to convince myself that he wasn't really there. Vito was barking again, and when I glanced through the curtains, I was terrified that the clown might see me. I attempted to call my dad, but he didn't pick up. I called my brother, who answered, but it was clear he was busy. He dismissed my concerns, telling me it was just a Halloween prank. I hoped he was right, but even as I tried to assure myself, the tension in my stomach remained. After a few minutes, the doorbell rang once more. I felt trapped in a nightmare. I kept telling Vito to be quiet, pulling the blinds shut so the clown wouldn't know what room I was in. I tried calling my dad again, but still no answer. When I called my brother back, he seemed in a hurry and told me just to ignore it, saying it was likely a joke. I hung up, feeling uneasy but also hoping he was correct. Minutes dragged on, and as I sat on the edge of my bed, my anxiety began to subside. After a while, I started to feel safe enough to relax and lay back down. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, Vito suddenly began growling and quietly barking, his behavior alerting me to something amiss. I turned to see what he was looking at. He was staring intently at the window. Listening closely, I heard a faint sound coming from right outside, like something thumping lightly and almost scratching against the glass. My bedroom was on the second floor, so it wasn't likely that anyone could be outside my window, but still, I was curious. I got up and pushed aside the blinds, and to my horror, there stood the man in the clown costume, his terrifying mask inches from the glass. He tilted his head, staring at me, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. Vito didn't even bark. Perhaps I had blocked out the sound in my panic. I ran out of my room with my phone in hand, dashing into my parents' bedroom, where I locked the door and dialed 911. I was too shaken to even cry. My body trembled, and my voice quivered as I spoke to the operator. I must have asked her to hurry every 20 seconds, and she kept assuring me, "They're coming as fast as they can." The police arrived at the house roughly 10 minutes later and inspected the exterior for any signs of attempted entry. They discovered that the latch on the front storm door had indeed been broken, as I suspected, and leaned against the side of the house by my bedroom window was my dad's ladder. It became clear that the man had gone into our storage shed outside, found the ladder, and used it to climb up to my window. To ease my mind, I decided to spend the night at my friend Adam's house. To this day, I still don't know if it was a sick prank played on Halloween, or if something far more sinister was about to occur. That night remains etched in my memory forever, as if it were a never-ending nightmare. Since then, I have learned that precautions are essential and that every moment in life can carry unexpected dangers behind it. This year, I chose a familiar path that led to a campsite that almost no one ever visited. The spot was in the middle of the forest, and although it usually wasn't anything special, the beauty of the autumn trees made it look spectacular. When I got there, I immediately started unpacking my things and gathering firewood for the campfire. It was around 4 in the afternoon, which gave me about 3 hours before sunset. As I was wandering around the area, picking up the driest sticks I could find, I suddenly looked up and froze. There was a man standing among the trees about 30 feet from me. He was staring at me with a cold, emotionless gaze. The man was tall, wearing a flannel jacket and jeans. I waved at him, trying to appear friendly, but he just stepped back slowly and disappeared deeper into the woods, in a direction I hadn't explored before, assuming it was just more trees there. I felt uneasy seeing him wandering in the forest, and I couldn't think of a logical reason for his presence other than camping, but even that didn't seem right. I kept an eye on the surroundings for the rest of the time, but with the wind rustling the leaves, it was almost impossible to hear anything clearly, making the evening far from comfortable. As the sun set, I lit the campfire, and my dreams of a peaceful night faded away due to the growing sense of unease. Although I tried convincing myself that the man I saw wasn't up to anything bad, I couldn't shake the strange feeling I had. I kept looking in all directions, and sometimes I thought I saw the shadow of a person standing on the edge of the campfire's light, but it was so dark that I couldn't be sure. An hour later, the night became colder than I expected, so I moved inside my tent and snuggled up in my sleeping bag. The campfire gradually died down, and I was just beginning to relax enough to fall asleep when I suddenly woke up. My eyes opened abruptly as if something had disturbed me. I lay there for a moment, unsure if I had woken up because of something or if it was just a coincidence. All I could hear was the wind pushing leaves against my tent and the gentle rustling of the trees around me. Then suddenly, my hearing sharpened as I picked up the distinct pattern of footsteps crunching on the leaves. Someone was walking outside my tent. I sat up quickly, feeling a wave of terror wash over me as panic began to set in. All I could think about was how vulnerable I was, sitting inside a small tent with no way to see what was happening or defend myself. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my bag, unzipped the tent, and sprinted outside. The moment I did, I found myself face to face with the same man I'd seen earlier in the forest. He was standing just a few feet away from the entrance of the tent, and I immediately recognized him by that same cold, empty stare. What scared me the most was that he didn't even react when I appeared so suddenly. He just stood there, staring, as if he had been waiting for something, but I had no intention of finding out what that was. I turned around and ran as fast as I could into the darkness of the forest, not caring which direction I went. It was pitch black, the wind howling around me, and the leaves crunching under my feet made it nearly impossible to hear anything else. So I honestly can't say if he chased me or not. Something was definitely on my side that night because I somehow stumbled onto a part of the trail that I recognized despite the darkness. I followed it until I reached the road. I never went back to the campsite to retrieve my things. I was too terrified of that part of the forest. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I genuinely believe that man had sinister intentions that night. It's an instinctive feeling I can't shake off. Whatever the truth may be, I will never camp in that forest again. It was the last Saturday of October, just days before Halloween, which was on a Tuesday this year. The big party was expected on the Saturday before, and my friends and I were looking for last-minute plans. All the events we had planned were sold out, leaving us with just one idea: to find a house party. We were eager to wear the funny Halloween costumes we had prepared, knowing it would be silly not to take advantage of them. My friend Kate decided to use Instagram and Snapchat to search for parties. I would never have done that. I considered it a bit shameful. However, I was glad to have someone willing to reach out like that. After a short while, she sent a message in the group chat telling us that someone had contacted her about a party. To my surprise, she sent us a screenshot containing the party details, the address, start time, and some important rules. It mentioned that there would be no access to the backyard and that everyone needed to bring their own drinks. There was also a strange requirement stating that one girl had to accompany every guy. The person who sent the details to Kate was one of our mutual friends, roughly our age. It appeared that several people we knew would be attending this party, and the house was just a town over, very close. We gathered as a group of 4 and decided to head to Shauna's house, where she was the host. We spent about an hour there getting ready, putting on our costumes and preparing to go out. After confirming that our male friends were on their way, we called an Uber and set off. During the ride, each of us had our own drinks, ranging from 4 Locos to White Claws to vodka shooters. When we arrived at the house, we saw a ton of cars parked everywhere. The house was pretty large, with a spacious front yard. As 4 girls walking in, we felt confident we would be warmly welcomed. We didn't hear any music until we got closer to the door, and as we approached, the bass began to thump. I opened the door to find myself in a room that felt like a mix between a living room and a kitchen. The entire house was dimly lit, only by a bunch of orange lights hung up, creating a festive Halloween ambience. The place was decently crowded, but honestly, we didn't know anyone there. Kate texted our friends to see if they had arrived yet. Meanwhile, an older guy came over and greeted us, asking for our names. He introduced himself as John Luke's dad, and it turned out that Luke was the one throwing the party. I asked who Luke was and where he went to school, and he replied, "Oh, he's around here somewhere. You can ask him when you see him." He then asked if we wanted to put our drinks in the cooler, leading us into the kitchen where there were 3 big coolers filled with ice, already stocked with drinks. John seemed to be in his 50s, which made sense since his son was throwing the party. But at the same time, it felt a bit strange that he would be so welcoming and involved in a big party in his own home. He was mingling with everyone, especially the girls, and he appeared to be slightly drunk. The 4 of us started playing beer pong at one of the tables where some guys began talking to us, and we started playing against them. Then Kate said our guy friends were on the way, which I was happy to hear. Suddenly, John yelled out our names over by the counter in the kitchen, calling for shots. My other 2 friends, Shauna and Tracy, looked a bit offended, so I asked, "Can we all have one?" He shouted back, "Yeah, sure." So we went over to the kitchen counter and all took a shot of tequila. I gagged a little because there was no lime, and I could definitely feel myself starting to get drunk. It was odd how much the dad of the house was trying to hype up this party. He had an oddly welcoming yet unsettling presence. The unsettling part was that he was much older than the generally college-aged crowd here, and he was pushing drinks on people. Then he asked what our drink of choice was. I wasn't going to say anything until the girls mentioned their favorites. John then began making a bunch of mixed drinks for us. In the meantime, we went back to the beer pong table where the guys we were playing against were still waiting. I plugged my phone into an outlet because it was down to about 50%. I returned to the game, but in the middle of it, John came over with 2 drinks for Kate and me, then came back with 2 more for Shauna and Tracy. They were all in red Solo cups. He made me a vodka soda, which I sipped during our beer pong game whenever I had a chance. I was taking it slow since I was already feeling drunk. After we lost to the random guy, I went to get my phone only to realize it hadn't charged at all. It was still at the same percent. The outlet wasn't working, and I didn't feel comfortable leaving my phone on any other outlets, so I refrained from draining the battery any further. Eventually, our guy friends showed up, and soon after, things started to become a blur. I mean very quickly. One moment I was chatting with our friend Jeff, and the next, I blacked out. The next thing I remember was my friends waking me up in the car outside my house. I felt woozy, my vision was blurred, and my head was spinning. We were in one of our guy friends' cars, and one of the guys walked me to my front door and helped me inside. Then they all left, leaving me alone except for my parents, who were asleep in their room. I felt like I must have drunk way too much, but there was also a strange, woozy feeling in my head that I had never experienced from drinking before. I felt dizzy as I headed straight to my room and collapsed into bed. Checking my phone, I found some text from a random unsaved number. I opened it and saw a bunch of messages. It started with me texting my name, followed by a reply from John. "Oh." After that, he sent, "You look so cute." Based on the time he sent this, it was still during the party. There was a 2-hour gap before he texted me again asking, "Where did my favorite girls go?" I was shocked at myself for giving that man my number. I must have been more intoxicated than I thought. Regardless, I lowered my head onto the pillow and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, I woke up to some disturbing texts, and as my head was spinning, I read these nauseating messages. After I had fallen asleep, I received texts from John saying, "Where are you? I'm coming to your house. You left something here." Followed by, "I'm here. Can you come to the door?" and then, "Hello? Are you awake?" He also tried calling me 3 times, all around 2 a.m. I sent a screenshot of these messages to my friends, and that's when they reminded me of what happened. John had been all over me while I was slowly becoming a zombie. My friends became concerned and pulled me away, and as we were leaving, 2 police cars showed up outside, presumably for a noise complaint. As we left, we noticed there was no furniture in the house. It was just a big empty space filled with people and beer pong tables. One of my guy friends somehow looked up the number and informed me it was a voice over IP number, which I didn't quite understand. He explained it was a fake phone number that John texted me from, and he added that with my number, he could easily find my address. I felt even sicker at that realization. I asked if anyone had ever met his alleged son, and everyone replied no. We were beginning to suspect that there was no son at all, and when Shauna suggested that he might have roofied me, it all started to make sense. I had never felt like this before. I knew something was seriously wrong. We decided to take this to the police. We all went to the nearest police station and reported everything, including the texts. The officer at the front desk asked if this was related to the house party in the vacant house last night. At first, we were confused by his mention of a vacant house until he explained that there had been a call from neighbors about a party going on in a house that had been vacant for some time. We all looked at each other, mouths agape. We were brought into an office to sit down with what I guessed was a detective, who took down our entire story. He took the fake phone number and said they would try to trace it back to someone once they got a warrant. We gave the police all the information we could, and then we went on our way. I blocked the fake number, but honestly, I felt sick over this for a while. As the days went on and nothing happened, I was confident it was over, but none of us ever heard from the police. We never heard of any arrests being made or anything. The thought that man had gone out of his way to advertise a house party in a vacant house to gain access to young women devastated me. The idea that he might have lied about having a son to lure girls like us was alarming. This was clearly a very dangerous man, and the fact that we still hadn't been called in to identify anyone frightened me, knowing he could still be out there. This was a month ago. I'll update if things change, and I'm crossing my fingers that they do.